The Outlaw's redeeming love. A wanted man saves a blind woman from a brothel, not knowing she's the daughter of the man he once killed. Can love heal them both? The wind howled through the narrow streets of Deadwood like a chorus of lost souls, rattling the swinging doors of saloons and kicking up dust that stung the eyes of anyone foolish enough to be out past sundown. Inside the Silver Slipper, the air was thick with the stench of whiskey, sweat, and cheap perfume. Men laughed too loudly, their voices rough from years of shouting over card games and bar fights. Women in satin and lace leaned against them, their smiles painted on, their laughter hollow. At the back of the room, near the staircase leading to the upstairs chambers, a girl sat alone on a wooden stool. She was young, too young for this place, with dark hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders and a faded blue dress that might have once been pretty. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers laced together as if in prayer. But the most striking thing about her was her eyes. They were a pale, milky blue, unseen but somehow still full of emotion, fear, resignation, a quiet kind of sorrow. The piano player struck up a bawdy tune, and the girl flinched at the sudden noise. A man in a bowler hat leered down at her, reaching out to tilt her chin up. "You're new, ain't ya?" She recoiled, but there was nowhere to go. Across the room, a man watched from the shadows. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that had seen too much sun and too little kindness. His hat was pulled low, casting his eyes in shadow, but the sharp line of his jaw and the set of his mouth spoke of a man who had long since stopped expecting mercy from the world. A faded wanted poster tacked to the wall nearby bore a rough sketch of his face. Wanted, Jesse Colt. Dead or alive. Jesse wasn't here for trouble. He was here for whiskey, for a moment of numbness before he moved on to the next town, the next empty stretch of wilderness where the law wouldn't find him. But then he saw the girl. Saw the way the man in the bowler hat gripped her wrist too tight. Saw the way she turned her face away, like she was bracing for a blow. Something inside him twisted. He hadn't planned on drawing attention to himself. Every second he stayed in one place was a risk. But the girl's blind eyes, the way she trembled, it dug into him like a spur. Before he could think better of it, he was crossing the room. "Let her go." His voice was low, rough from disuse, but it carried. The man in the bowler hat sneered. "This ain't your business, friend." Jesse didn't blink. "It is now." A hush fell over the nearby tables. Men turned to watch, sensing violence in the air. The girl's breath hitched, her unseeing eyes darting toward the sound of Jesse's voice. The man in the bowler hesitated, then released her with a shove. "She ain't worth the trouble." Jesse didn't answer. He just reached down, offering his hand. The girl didn't take it at first. She tilted her head, listening as if trying to place him. Then, slowly, her fingers brushed against his palm. They were ice cold. "Come on," he said quietly. "You don't belong here." She stood unsteady, and he guided her toward the door. The saloon's patrons watched them go, some with amusement, others with indifference. No one stopped them. Outside, the night air was sharp with the promise of winter. The girl shivered, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Where do you live?" Jesse asked. She shook her head. "Nowhere." He frowned. "Family?" Another shake. "Gone." A long pause. Then, softly, "What's your name?" "Lillian." Something in his chest tightened. Lillian. It was a gentle name, the kind a mother might whisper to a child at bedtime. Not a name meant for a place like this. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He should walk away. Leave her with a few coins, maybe, and disappear into the night. But the thought of her stumbling back into that saloon, of some other man grabbing her, he couldn't do it. "I've got a horse," he said finally. "There's a boarding house on the edge of town. I'll take you there." She hesitated. Why? The question hung between them. Jesse didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense, anyway. Maybe it was the way she reminded him of someone he'd failed long ago. Maybe it was just that the world had taken so much from her already, and he was tired of seeing good things broken. "Because you shouldn't be here," he said at last. She was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly she nodded. He helped her onto his horse, swung up behind her, and nudged the animal into a walk. The town faded behind them, the noise of the saloon swallowed by the night. Lillian sat stiffly at first, as if afraid to lean back. But as the miles passed, exhaustion won out, and she sagged against him, her head resting against his shoulder. Jesse stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. He didn't know it yet, but the girl in his arms was the daughter of the man he'd killed 3 years ago. and she had no idea who he was. The boarding house stood at the edge of town, a weathered two-story building with a sagging porch and a single lantern burning by the door. Jesse reined in his horse and dismounted, then reached up to help Lillian down. She hesitated before sliding into his arms, her hands gripping his shoulders for balance. She was lighter than he expected, as if hardship had whittled her down to bone and willpower. The door creaked open before they reached it, and an elderly woman with a shawl draped over her shoulders peered out. Her sharp eyes flicked from Jesse to Lillian, lingering on the girl's blind gaze and the way her fingers clutched the fabric of Jesse's coat. "We need a room," Jesse said, his voice low. The woman, Mrs. Holloway, according to the peeling sign by the door, crossed her arms. "You her husband?" "No." "Brother?" "No." Mrs. Holloway's lips thinned. "Then I don't rent to that kind of arrangement." Jesse's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Lillian turned toward the woman's voice. "Please," she said softly. "I have nowhere else to go." Something in her tone must have struck the old woman, because her expression softened. She sighed. $2 a night. Meals extra. And no trouble. Jesse dug out the coins and pressed them into her palm. Mrs. Holloway led them inside, up a narrow staircase to a small room at the end of the hall. It was plain but clean, a bed, a washstand, a single chair by the window. A far cry from the filth of the silver slipper. Lillian stepped forward, her hands brushing the quilt on the bed, the rough wood of the nightstand, as if memorizing the space by touch. "I'll bring up some supper," Mrs. Holloway said, then left, closing the door behind her. Silence settled between them. Jesse shifted, suddenly aware of how out of place he was. A wanted man standing in a room with a girl he barely knew, neither of them speaking. He should leave. He'd done what he could. But then Lillian spoke. "Why did you help me?" The question again. This time, he owed her more than evasion. He exhaled, running a hand over his face. "I've seen enough girls like you end up in places like that. Most don't make it out." She turned toward his voice, her unseeing eyes searching. "You don't seem like the kind of man who cares about what happens to strangers." He almost laughed. She was right. The Jesse Colt of 3 years ago wouldn't have glanced twice at a blind girl in a saloon. But that was before the weight of his sins had settled on him like a second skin. "Maybe I'm trying to balance the scales," he muttered. She tilted her head. "What does that mean?" Before he could answer, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Holloway entered with a tray, stew, bread, a cup of weak tea. She set it on the table, gave Jesse a pointed look, and left again. Lillian sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "You should eat," she said. "Aren't you hungry?" "Yes. But I don't know if I can trust the food yet." The admission hit him like a punch to the gut. How many times had someone given her something only to demand payment later? He picked up the spoon, took a deliberate bite of the stew. "It's safe." She listened to the sound of him chewing, then slowly reached for the bread. They ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of spoons and the distant creak of the house settling. When the meal was finished, Jesse stood. "I should go." She didn't protest, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. "Will you come back?" The question surprised him. "Do you want me to?" She hesitated, then nodded. He studied her for a long moment, the way the lamplight caught in her hair, the quiet determination in her posture. She was afraid, but she wasn't broken. "Not yet." "I'll come back," he said. Outside, the night was cold and still. Jesse walked to the edge of town, where his horse waited, and leaned against a fence post, staring up at the stars. He shouldn't go back. Every minute he spent near her was a risk, for both of them. If she ever found out who he was, what he'd done. But he'd given his word. And for the first time in years, that meant something. Dawn was still an hour away when Jesse returned to the boarding house. He hadn't slept. Instead, he'd spent the night pacing the outskirts of town, wrestling with the uneasy feeling that he was stepping into something far more dangerous than a shootout. The front door was unlocked. Mrs. Holloway either trusted too easily or didn't care who came and went. He climbed the stairs quietly, pausing outside Lillian's room. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What was he doing here? Before he could decide, the door creaked open. Lillian stood in the doorway, still dressed in the same faded blue dress, her hair slightly tousled as if she, too, had been awake all night. She tilted her head, listening. "You came back." He exhaled. "I said I would." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Most men don't keep their word. He didn't answer. She stepped aside, letting him enter. The room was just as he'd left it, Bed neatly made, tray cleared of food, the window cracked open to let in the cool morning air. She moved with surprising grace for someone who couldn't see, her fingers brushing the chair for orientation before she sat. Jessie remained standing, arms crossed. "You sleep at all?" She shook her head. "I kept thinking about the saloon. About what would have happened if you hadn't been there." He clenched his jaw. He knew exactly what would have happened. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Lillian spoke again, her voice softer. "You never told me your name." "Jessie." "Just Jessie." "Just Jessie." She nodded, as if she understood the weight of what he wasn't saying. "Well, just Jessie, thank you. For last night." He grunted, shifting uncomfortably under her gratitude. He didn't deserve it. Not when he knew the truth. A knock at the door startled them both. Mrs. Holloway's voice carried through the wood. "Miss Lillian? There's a man downstairs asking after you." Lillian's face paled. Jessie was at her side in an instant, his hand hovering near his gun. "Who is it?" She swallowed hard. "I don't know. But no one knows I'm here unless someone from the Silver Slipper followed us," he finished. She gripped the edge of the chair, her knuckles white. "If it's him, the man from last night, he won't let me go easily." Jessie's voice dropped to a growl. "Stay here." He moved to the door, but Lillian caught his wrist. Her touch was light but firm. "Wait." Turned. Her blind eyes searched the air between them, as if trying to see into his soul. "Why are you helping me?" For the third time she'd asked. And for the third time, he couldn't give her the real answer. Instead, he gently pulled his wrist free. "Because no one else will." Downstairs, a man in a dusty duster stood at the front desk, his back to the stairs. Jessie recognized him instantly, the bowler-hatted man from the saloon. Mrs. Holloway glanced up as Jessie descended, her expression tight with disapproval. "This gentleman claims he's looking for his sister." The man turned, and his smirk faded when he saw Jessie. Well, the Good Samaritan." Jessie didn't blink. "She's not your sister." The man's hand drifted toward his hip. "That's none of your concern." The air in the room thickened. Jessie didn't move, but his fingers flexed near his revolver. "Walk away." The man hesitated, then chuckled darkly. "You're protecting her now? What's she to you?" Jessie's voice was ice. "More than she'll ever be to you." For a long moment, neither moved. Then, with a scoff, the man tipped his hat. "This ain't over." He strode out, slamming the door behind him. Mrs. Holloway let out a breath. "That one's trouble." Jessie didn't answer. He was already heading back upstairs. Lillian stood exactly where he'd left her, her arms wrapped around herself. Was it him? Yeah. She exhaled shakily. "He'll be back." Jessie studied her, the way she held herself, the quiet fear in her voice. She was right. That man wouldn't give up. And Jessie couldn't stay in town forever. Which left only one option. "Pack your things," he said. She stilled. "What?" "We're leaving." Her brows furrowed. "Where?" "Somewhere he won't find you." She opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. Because what choice did she have? Slowly, she nodded. Jessie turned to the window, watching as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. He'd saved her last night. But now, he was taking her with him. And he had no idea how much harder that would make the truth when it finally came out. The sun had barely risen when they rode out of town, Lillian perched in front of Jessie on his horse, her small bundle of belongings tied behind the saddle. She sat stiffly at first, her hands gripping the pommel, every muscle tense with the unspoken question, "What have I gotten myself into?" Jessie didn't offer reassurance. He wasn't sure he had any to give. The land stretched before them, open prairie giving way to rocky hills, the kind of country where a man could disappear if he knew how. Jessie knew how. He'd been disappearing for years. Lillian's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Where are we going?" "Away." She exhaled, frustrated. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." She fell silent again, but he could feel the tension in her shoulders. She was scared. And she had every right to be. They rode for hours, stopping only to let the horse rest. Jessie scanned the horizon constantly, his hand never far from his gun. The man from the saloon might have given up for now, but there were other dangers, lawmen, bounty hunters, men who'd recognize his face from a wanted poster. As the sun began to dip, Jessie guided the horse toward a shallow creek flanked by cottonwoods. He dismounted, then reached up to help Lillian down. Her legs wobbled from the long ride, and she stumbled against him. He steadied her, then quickly stepped back. "We'll camp here tonight," he said. She nodded, rubbing her arms against the evening chill. "Do you need help with the fire?" He almost said no. But something in her voice, the quiet determination, made him pause. "You know how to build one?" Her lips quirked. "I may be blind, but I'm not helpless." A flicker of shame heated his neck. "Didn't mean it like that." She knelt, feeling for dry twigs in the grass. "I know." They worked in silence, Jesse gathering larger branches, Lillian arranging the kindling with careful fingers. When the fire sparked to life, its glow painted her face in gold and shadow, softening the sharp edges of her fear. Jesse rummaged in his saddlebag for the last of the bread and jerky. He handed her half. She took it, nibbling slowly. "You don't talk much, do you?" "Not unless I've got something to say." She tilted her head. "What do you have to say?" He studied her, the way the firelight caught in her hair, the quiet curiosity in her expression. She was digging, gently, trying to piece together the man who'd dragged her out of one danger and into another. He should have shut it down. But for some reason he didn't. "I used to have a sister," he said abruptly. Lillian stilled. "Older than me," he continued, staring into the flames. "Took care of me when our ma died. Then one day she just wasn't there anymore." Lillian's voice was soft. "What happened to her?" His jaw tightened. "Bad men. Bad choices." She didn't press further. Maybe she heard the warning in his tone. Or maybe she understood that some wounds never stopped bleeding. After a moment, she said, "I had a father once." Jesse's chest constricted. "He wasn't a good man," she continued. "But he was all I had. Then one day, he didn't come home." She swallowed. "They told me he was killed in a card game. Shot in the back." The bread in Jesse's hand turned to ash in his mouth. 3 years ago. A saloon in Laramie. A cheating gambler reaching for a derringer. A single shot. His fingers twitched toward his gun, as if he could still feel the recoil. Lillian couldn't see his reaction, but she must have sensed the shift in the air. "Jesse?" He stood abruptly. "Get some sleep. We ride at first light." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Nodded. Jesse stalked to the edge of the firelight, his pulse roaring in his ears. This was a mistake. Every second he spent with her, every word she spoke, it was a hammer chipping away at the wall between them. And when it crumbled, when she finally saw him for what he was, she'd hate him. And she'd be right to. The dream came like it always did, the crack of gunfire, the gambler's wide eyes as he clutched his chest, the way his body slumped against the saloon's poker table like a sack of grain. Only this time, when the dead man lifted his head, it wasn't a stranger's face. It was Lillian's. "You killed me," she whispered. Jesse jerked awake, his hand already on his revolver. Dawn painted the sky in pale streaks, and the campfire had burned down to embers. Across from him, Lillian slept curled on her side, her breathing steady. He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. 3 years. 3 years since that night in Laramie, and the guilt still clung to him like a second skin. And now here he was, traveling with the dead man's daughter. The irony would have made him laugh if it didn't make him sick. A twig snapped in the trees. Jesse was on his feet in an instant, gun drawn. The horse lifted its head, ears twitching. Nothing moved. But he'd spent too long living on the run to ignore instinct. They weren't alone. "Lillian." He kept his voice low. She stirred, then sat up quickly, sensing the tension. "What's wrong?" "Get behind me." She scrambled to obey just as the first shot rang out. The bullet splintered the tree beside them. Jesse shoved Lillian down, returning fire toward the muzzle flash in the brush. A man cried out, the bowler-hatted bastard from the saloon. 2 more figures emerged from the trees, guns drawn. "Give us the girl, Colt," one snarled. "This ain't your fight." Colt. The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Lillian went rigid beside him. Jesse didn't have time to explain. He fired again, driving the men back. "Run to the horse," he gritted out. She hesitated only a second before lunging toward the sound of the animal's panicked snorts. Jesse covered her, squeezing off shots until his revolver clicked empty. By the time he reached the saddle, Lillian was already mounted, her face pale. He swung up behind her and spurred the horse into a gallop. Bullets whined past them as they crashed through the underbrush. Jesse didn't slow until the gunfire faded behind them and the horse's sides heaved with exhaustion. Only then did he feel Lillian trembling against him. And only then did she speak. "Colt," she whispered. His stomach dropped. She twisted in the saddle, her blind eyes wide. Your name is Jessie Colt? The way she said it, like the name itself was a knife to her ribs, told him everything. She knew. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. 3 years ago. Laramie. A card game. The words landed like blows. Jessie's hands tightened on the reins. Lillian. She shoved away from him so violently he had to grab her waist to keep her from tumbling off the horse. Let me go. He reined in, and she practically fell from the saddle, stumbling as her boots hit dirt. She backed away, her hands outstretched as if to ward him off. You killed my father. Her voice broke. Jessie dismounted slowly, his hands raised. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She screamed. The sound tore through the quiet morning, raw and bleeding. Tell me how you murdered him. The truth sat like a stone in his throat. He was cheating. I called him on it. He drew first. She shook her head violently. Liar. I wish I was. A sob wrenched from her chest. She sank to her knees, her fingers digging into the earth. All this time. You knew. Yes. And you still, she choked on the words. Was this some kind of penance? Save the blind girl to make up for killing her father? No. He took a step toward her. I didn't know who you were at first. Not until you told me how he died. She laughed, a broken, hollow sound. And then you kept lying. What could he say to that? She was right. Every moment after had been a lie by omission. He crouched in front of her, close enough to touch but not daring to. I wanted to tell you. Then why didn't you? Because I knew this would happen. He gestured to the space between them, the chasm that had opened wide enough to swallow them both. She wiped her face with shaking hands. Those men back there. They weren't just after me, were they? Jessie exhaled. No. You're wanted. Yes. For what? Enough things that it doesn't matter. She rocked back on her heels, absorbing that. Then quietly, you should leave me here. Like hell. They'll keep coming. For you. And I'll just be, she gestured helplessly, collateral. He reached for her then, gripping her shoulders. Listen to me. Those men back there? They're the ones who sold you to that saloon. They don't get to have you. Not ever again. She shuddered under his hands but didn't pull away. Why do you care? The question of his life. Because, he said roughly, I'm tired of watching good people get hurt. For a long moment, she was silent. Then so quiet he almost missed it. I don't know if I can forgive you. His chest ached. I don't expect you to. She lifted her face to his, her unseen eyes glistening. Then what happens now? Jessie looked back the way they'd come. Soon, those men would regroup. Soon, they'd be hunted in earnest. Now, he said, helping her to her feet, we run. They rode hard, pushing the horse to its limits as the sun climbed higher. Lillian sat stiffly in front of Jessie, her body rigid with tension. The truth hung between them like a blade, sharp, unmovable. Jessie kept one eye on the horizon, the other on the trail behind them. The men from the camp would be tracking them. And if they caught up, there'd be no mercy. Not for him. Certainly not for Lillian. The land grew rougher, the trees thicker. A good place to disappear. A better place to die. Lillian's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely audible over the pounding hooves. Where does this end? Jessie didn't answer right away. He'd spent years running, but he'd never thought much about where the road might lead. Only that he had to keep moving. Don't know, he admitted. She turned her face toward the wind. I can't keep running forever. Neither could he. A gunshot cracked in the distance. Jessie cursed, spurring the horse faster. They were closer than he'd thought. Lillian's fingers dug into his arm. They're coming. Yeah. She hesitated, then said the words that had been hanging over them since dawn. You could leave me. You'd be faster alone. His grip on the reins tightened. Not happening. Why? Because I'm done letting people down. The confession surprised even him. But it was true. He'd failed his sister. Failed himself. Failed Lillian before he'd even known her name. He wouldn't do it again. The trail narrowed, forcing them to slow. Jessie scanned the terrain. A steep drop to their left, boulders and scrub brush to their right. Nowhere to hide. Then he saw it. An old miner's cabin, half collapsed but still standing. Hold on, he muttered, guiding the horse toward it. They dismounted in a rush. Jessie kicked open the rotting door, gun drawn. Empty. He pulled Lillian inside just as another shot ricocheted off the rocks outside. "Stay down," he ordered, shoving her toward the far wall. She caught his wrist. "Jesse!" Her voice stopped him cold. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. For the first time in years, someone was offering to stand with him. Not because they didn't know the truth. Because they did. He swallowed hard. Then nodded. The door burst open. The bowler-hatted man filled the doorway, his gun leveled at Jesse's chest. "End of the line, Colt." Jesse didn't flinch. "Walk away." The man laughed. "Not a chance." Behind him, his two companions fanned out, blocking any escape. Lillian's breath was quick beside Jesse, but she didn't cower. Instead, she stepped forward. "You don't want me," she said, her voice steady. "You never did. You just want to hurt him." The man's grin turned vicious. "Maybe. But I'll take you anyway." Jesse moved before the man could blink. His fist connected with the bowler hat's jaw, sending him stumbling back. The other two lunged forward, but Jesse was faster. His revolver barked once, twice. One man fell. The other scrambled for cover. The leader snarled, drawing his own gun. Jesse fired. The shot went wide as Lillian suddenly threw herself against Jesse, knocking him aside just as the man pulled the trigger. The bullet grazed Jesse's shoulder, searing like fire. He gritted his teeth, shoving Lillian behind him as he fired again. This time, he didn't miss. Silence. Then, slowly, the last man crumpled to the ground. Jesse's ears rang. His shoulder burned. But Lillian was safe. She gripped his arm, her fingers coming away wet with blood. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." She shook her head, her blind eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's not nothing." Outside, the wind howled through the trees. The horse whinnied nervously. Jesse exhaled, sagging against the wall. "It's over." Lillian didn't answer. Instead, she reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek. He froze. "I hated you this morning," she whispered. He closed his eyes. "I know." Her thumb traced the line of his jaw. "But I don't think I can anymore." The words unraveled something deep inside him. He caught her hand, pressing it to his chest where his heart hammered. "Lillian." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "We don't have to run anymore." And for the first time in years, Jesse believed it. The past would always be there. The guilt, the grief, none of that would vanish overnight. But maybe, just maybe, they could build something new from the wreckage. Together. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting gold across the dusty cabin floor. And for the first time in a long time, Jesse Colt saw a future worth staying for.